Why don't we just get started? So today we have two amazing speakers, Theo and Cynthia, and they're going to be giving us the talk today. So Theo and Cynthia, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everyone. I'm Cynthia. I'm one of the speakers today. And before we introduce ourselves, we wanted to welcome you to the first in our three-part series, Transformed. Over the next 3 days, we're going to address how the Christian faith is able to transform, especially our view of our world, our pursuits, and our stories. Hopefully, our talks are able to inspire you, encourage you, or even answer some questions you've been having. But yeah, to introduce myself, I'm Cynthia. I'm a senior studying electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley, and I'm a part of Klesis Christian Fellowship. And this is a picture of me and my family. This is a picture of me with some of my closest college friends. And this one's a throwback. This is me on the very first day I moved into the dorms at UC Berkeley. One of the most common phrases said between me and my two roommates was, "You want to get late night?" And that's how I got the freshman 15.
And yeah, my name is Theo. Hey, everyone. I am a graduating senior. I'm studying bio, and I'm also a part of Klesis. So yeah, here's me with my family. Here's me with some friends. And yeah, here are all the hair colors that I've had in college. I definitely would have kept going, but my grandma doesn't like it, so she told me to stop, and that's a true story. Okay, anyway, bringing it back to what Cynthia said earlier. So we are doing a 3-night series with different speakers every night. And for this first night, Cynthia and I will be talking about our transformed world. So yeah, that's definitely something that's been on my mind more than usual because, of course, coronavirus. And we just can't escape its impact. It honestly feels like I was just reading about the virus for the first time ever, and then all of a sudden everything's canceled and there's just thousands of cases here in the Bay Area. I know that by now, many of us on this call have probably felt the coronavirus in some way, whether it's the cancellation of graduations and weddings, or the loss of jobs and internships, or even the health of a loved one. Our hearts really do go out to each of you. It feels like the world is broken right now, and it also feels like it shouldn't be this way. So actually, the other week, a friend asked me, what is God's intention with all that's wrong in the world? After all, how could a God that claims to be loving let the world be overcome by wars, fires, and now plagues? I think the question boils down to this. If God, why evil? The word evil in this context, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with demons and pitchforks. I think the word evil just captures the wide range of human experiences that we find distressing or painful. Maybe an appropriate substitute would just be hurt, agony, or suffering. So even if you haven't asked this specific question, if God, why evil? There's a good chance that all of us in this room have probably asked it in some other variation. So it's like, if God, if you're good, then why did they have to die? Or God, where were you when I was suffering? So if I asked you to fill in this blank, God, why did you let blank happen? What would that blank be for you? So for me personally, I think of what we're living through right now. Every time I scroll through my newsfeed, I see sensational headlines. They make me feel sad and sometimes afraid. I think of how people in New York and really around the world are dying from coronavirus and how hospitals just don't have the tools they need. I think of nurses working without proper PPE and losing their lives. I read about domestic abuse on the rise as a result of this extended cohabitation. And I think about the kids out there for whom school is the only structure in their lives, the only food they can count on, and the only guaranteed safety. So who's going to protect these kids now that every school is shut down? The more I look, it feels like just more ugliness I see. And I have to ask, God, how could you let this happen? So yeah, as I'm sure you know, the problem of evil is this profoundly emotional question. And every one of us, no matter where or how we were raised, has been touched by evil in one way or another. So what I'm saying is this. If you came here tonight carrying some deep scars or wounds, I just want to say right away, we're not here to diminish what you experienced in any way. What you experienced was real hurt. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. We're not here to logically explain everything that's going on. To even suggest that there are easy answers would be offensive. But what we as Christians firmly believe is that Christianity has a whole lot to say about what is wrong with the world. In fact, I would go so far as to say that all of Christianity, the whole book, from the first page to the last, can be summed up as one thing, and that's God's response to evil. It's what God has done and is doing to redeem human suffering. So wherever you stand tonight, Whether you've thought about these things before or just have never wondered about it in your life, we welcome you. Our hope is that our talk will help to diffuse an issue that's often very emotionally charged, to offer some clarity just as we grapple and unravel this difficult subject.
Okay, thanks, Theo. So here's a plan for how exactly we're going to do that. First, we're going to consider, is there a contradiction between evil as a philosophical idea and a good and all-powerful God? Next, we're going to explore what a world without evil might look like. After that, we're going to take a look at natural evil, a category of evil that includes forest fires, earthquakes, cancer and disease, and even coronavirus. And then we're going to consider some possible redemptive reasons for suffering before finally ending on the Christian response to evil and suffering.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, we recognize that evil is an emotional subject. We promise we're going to give our best effort to unpacking what Christianity has to say about this emotional problem of evil. But in order to do so, we first need to lay the foundation by talking about the logical problem of evil. So now let's first look at evil as a concept, evil from a 33,000-foot view. So, right, is there a contradiction, as many skeptics suggest, between a good God and the existence of evil? Well, actually, if you think about it, evil is not really a problem if God doesn't exist. Why is that? Well, because if our universe really is just a big pot of molecule soup with particles bouncing around, everything is just an outcome of the blind laws of physics and probability. So everything is really just a roll of the dice. There's no rhyme or reason to our human experience. This is what Richard Dawkins, who's a vocal atheist, has to say about our universe. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. So in this case, Dawkins' argument is no God equals no purpose, no good, and no evil. Without a God who created the world with intention, you can't really say that's wrong or it's not supposed to be that way, because there wasn't a supposed to be about our universe to begin with. So under this philosophy, we can't condemn injustice, rapists, murderers, tyrants. In Dawkins' words, they're just dancing to their DNA. So as it turns out, under this atheistic worldview, we don't really have a problem of evil. You don't complain that something's crooked when you don't have a concept of straight. And you don't complain that something's wrong unless there is a right.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Theo. But I think things start to become an issue the moment God comes into the picture, specifically a being that is supposed to be all-powerful and all-loving. Once you put God in the equation, we have a problem because, as Epicurus, a Greek philosopher, says, if God is all-powerful, he could stop suffering. If he is all-loving, he would want to stop suffering. That purposeless suffering exists shows that God does not exist. In other words, there seems to be a contradiction between a God who is all-loving and all-powerful and the existence of evil. So how does a Christian resolve this? I want to first focus on the word all-powerful and what exactly do we mean by calling God all-powerful? You've all probably heard some variation on this question. Can God create a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? Or as Homer Simpson asked, can God microwave a burrito so hot he can't eat it? If he's God, he can do anything, right? So we're going to do a quick poll to see what you guys think. Can God microwave a burrito so hot he can't eat it? Okay, awesome. It looks like most people are saying no. But probably as you guys were answering this question, it was kind of hard to even make sense of. And that's because the question itself doesn't make much sense. But to clarify, when Christians use the word all-powerful, they're not saying God can do absolutely everything that can be said with the English language. We're certainly not saying that God can do what's intrinsically impossible. It's like asking, can God create a four-sided triangle? Well, no, because a triangle is by definition a shape with three sides. And saying that God can't do those things does not limit God's power in any way. All it means is that God can't create nonsense. So when Christians say that God is omnipotent or all-powerful, what we really mean to say is that God can do anything, as long as it's not nonsense and stays within the realm of possibility. Okay, so then what does intrinsic impossibility have to do with suffering?
That is a great question. Okay, so God can't do things that are intrinsically impossible. Let's remember that. But what does that have to do with suffering? So I want to bring it back to Epicurus's first statement. Can an all-powerful God stop every evil? And I want to add on, if he can, then what would that world look like? Let's consider this example of drunk driving accidents. How would God prevent that kind of suffering? Can't God just let cars be cars until the moment of the crash? Then God can make an exception to the rules and turn the cars into ghost cars that pass through one another, and then they're back to being normal cars. So that's a great idea. Why doesn't it work like that? But I want to ask, does it really hold up? Should God just make exceptions to the rules every time something's about to go wrong? Okay, one thing I know for sure is that you have to follow the rules when you're playing a game like chess. I was in a chess tournament when I was like 12, and they're very serious about following the rules. But if I'm playing chess with my friend, then it's different. I'm cool with letting them take back a move. Like if they do something really bad and they're like, oh, can I do that again? Then I'm fine with it. But what if I let my friend take back a move whenever he wanted, whenever he did something disadvantageous? What if my friend could move all the pieces around or make my pieces disappear? Then we wouldn't have a game of chess at all. Back to the drunk driving example. What could God do? Could God intervene the moment a person wants to have one drink too many? Should God prevent alcohol consumption? Should God ban cars from driving over a lethal speed limit? It seems like in the process of God eliminating this evil, something else gets taken away. And that's our freedom and ability to make meaningful choices. What I'm trying to say is this. If God intervenes every time our actions could result in our own harm or someone else's, he would also be depriving us of something fundamental to our existence, and that's free will. So yeah, coming back to our question, can an all-powerful God stop every evil? The technical answer is yes, but this would also mean that he takes away our free will and ability to make meaningful choices. Where there is free will, there is a possibility for abusing it. You can't have one without the other. A world having both free creatures and no evil is an intrinsic impossibility that even an all-powerful God cannot create.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so now let's take a step back. Let's recap what we've said so far. We started off by asking, how can we logically reconcile a good God, and the existence of evil? We learned that it's actually not blasphemous to believe that God can't do certain things, especially when those things are inherently contradictory, like the existence of free will and the absence of evil. And we talked about how free will is pretty important to how we live because it enables us to make meaningful choices. So we've covered a lot. I'm going to give you guys a mental break now to let some memory consolidation happen. So take 1 minute to consider what you've heard, jot down a couple points or a question you have right now, and we'll return in a minute. Okay, great. So I'm going to pass it back to Theo, who's going to introduce our next topic.
Right, cool, thanks, Cynthia. Okay, so now we're gonna get to a big topic that I'm sure has been on our minds. What about natural disasters? So those seem to be completely unrelated to human agency. You can't possibly blame hurricanes or earthquakes on human free will. Okay, so about that, there's two things that I want to point out. Okay, first off, I think we can all agree that there's nothing inherently evil or vile about natural disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, they're all just natural phenomena. So if they happened on another planet, like a 10.0 magnitude Jupiter quake or a Mars quake, we wouldn't even be talking about them, unless Ghirardelli was looking for new names for their ice cream, maybe. The point is this, natural phenomena themselves are morally neutral. If anything, they're the very things that keep our planet running. Hurricanes distribute heat, earthquakes renew the Earth's soil.
That makes sense. So then the question that follows is, why do we suffer from these natural disasters? Here's one take on it from a report by the Brookings Institute on Disasters in 2011, which was written by non-religious academics. Some would go so far as to argue that there are no natural disasters, that a disaster is a result of the failure of authorities to either prevent or respond adequately to the negative effects of natural phenomena. I'm not sure how you guys feel about this statement, and I understand that it's a pretty extreme stance, and even my first reaction to this statement isn't a full-hearted agreement. But I do think that it gives us a helpful perspective on how natural disasters, which Theo explained are morally neutral and sometimes even necessary, can produce such painful experiences. I think in this case, we also need to turn an eye to coronavirus. I know by this time, Most of your lives have probably been touched by this, and this can be a very personal subject. But I think it also helps to somehow, we need to make sense of this somehow too. How could this virus wreak such havoc on our world, our health system, economy, and even lives? At this point, we probably associate the word virus with a lot of fear. But like how Theo was talking about the benefits of things like forest fires and earthquakes, we also need to give viruses their own credit. For example, some viruses, bacteriophages, protect us from bacteria that could possibly infect us and harm us. And viruses that enter our body through early infections can also become incorporated into our immune system, keeping us healthy later on down the line. And these viruses can also help us identify and protect ourselves from things like cancer cells or other infections. So they're not all bad. But then how did this particular virus become the headliner for every news story these days? I mean, for one, misleading reporting and failure to think about the systemic consequences. For example, until early March of this year, media outlets were still reporting that the public needed to beware of pandemic panic, convincing many that this new virus was no more deadly than the flu. This is also partially due to vast underestimations of the compounded effects that the virus's spread could cause on top of the already heavy load on the world health system. And on top of that, there was a sluggish response even when the dangers were made known. On a large scale, there was a failure to respond by increasing production of critical medical supplies, and even at the local level to take early action to enforce things like social distancing. And according to many sources, this outbreak isn't a unicorn event, and it's not quite as out of the blue as we may all feel it has been. Experts have been warning for years about the next pandemic. Even in theoretical reports, they warn of the dangers of a respiratory virus that could spread quickly and silently. Sound familiar? A 2018 report from The Atlantic warned that we were not prepared for the arrival of the quote-unquote next pandemic, claiming that the US was prone to forgetfulness and short-sightedness, even as the author detailed major outbreaks that we've gone through like Ebola and H1N1. And these aren't all the facts, and this is not the full story, but they make a pretty convincing case. And yet, as we consider these facts, I still don't think that we can reasonably chalk up everything we've experienced to the choices of politicians or authorities. But I think as we consider, it helps us make sense of how human choices or even human negligence can cause a lot of pain in our world. There was a lot more that the authorities could have done to mitigate the damage of this natural phenomenon. And these scenarios have definitely revealed, even outside of politics and medicine, that inequality, domestic distress, and personal pain can have their roots in human choice. But still, as a Christian, I think there's another dimension to human responsibility as it relates to natural evil. I think it speaks especially to the natural evil that we see in the world right now. And natural evil is a difficult subject, but every worldview, not just Christianity, but atheism, pantheism, Eastern spirituality, has to give an account for it somehow. So first, here's the Christian perspective. The Bible's assertion is that our sins have somehow poisoned the earth itself. In Genesis 3, after the fall in the garden, God says these words to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life." And what this tells us is that the world as we see it today is somehow corrupted from its original design. That somehow things are not as they were meant to be. And as I think about our world right now, how the small guys are still getting beaten out by the big guys, and how inequalities are magnified by the new working dynamics of shelter in place versus essential workers, and how death rates of minorities have been proportionally greater, it makes a lot of sense to say that something about our world is broken. The Bible says that when humanity sinned and fell, nature fell along with us. And this fall led to the corruption of our world and the introduction of death. What this means is that death was not a part of the original plan. It makes sense of our intuition that there is nothing natural about death at all, even though we call it a natural evil. It makes sense of the feeling that we get when we're actually confronted by death, the outrage we feel that something has been interrupted or cut short. The Bible tells us that God made us to live forever, but we severed that by our own choice, and our sin is what brought death into the world. And that's the biblical view of natural evil, that our world has been corrupted from its original design by human sin, and that God never intended things like sickness, sorrow, evil, and death. And if the Christian response doesn't seem satisfying, that's fair. But we still need to ask, how then can we make sense of the evil in our world under a different worldview? What other options do we have? Under a consistent atheism, we can't even claim that there's evil in the world because there was no original design. We can chalk anything up to nature just doing its thing. And under pantheism, we can't quite call this evil either because it seems like this is a beneficial situation for things like viruses and wildlife. And under other Eastern religions, this world might just be an illusion.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for those perspectives. So the big question we've been tackling is, number one, if God is all powerful, he could stop suffering. So we've seen that for God to create a world with free will and no evil is intrinsically impossible. Think of a four-sided triangle. And we've just talked for a bit about what the Bible has to say on natural disasters. So I think these give us some way to respond to that first question. So now I want to move on to the second big question of the night. If God is all loving, he would want to stop suffering. Epicurus suggests that God's goodness implies that he would want to eliminate all suffering. Is that true? Okay, pet owners in the room. Imagine if you took your dog, and it's a philosophizing dog, to the vet, and you subject this dog to a painful needle. So in his mind, he's thinking, if my owner is able, he would stop suffering. If my owner is all loving, he would want to stop suffering. And now, all of a sudden, your dog's starting to doubt your goodness and your existence. Now, it's not going to do you much good to sit your dog down and try to explain to him why needles are necessary to prevent diseases. And that's not because you lack the ability to communicate, but because of a limitation on your dog's part to reason and understand. And if that's the distance between a dog and us, what about the distance between us and our Creator? You see, something that was crucial that was missing from our description of God earlier is God's wisdom. God is not just all-powerful and all-loving. He's all-knowing, all-wise. Now, I want to clarify this. This is not just the God works in mysterious ways, so get on with it kind of answer. Some of us have gotten those, and we know that they're not helpful. But I think these questions really are worth asking. If there is a God who sprung the universe into existence, who's the author of quantum mechanics and molecular biology, is it possible there might be things about reality that we don't understand? In fact, I think it might be weirder if we really did understand everything about reality. I think one plausible explanation for why our realities are sometimes fraught with difficulties is that perhaps God has a higher plan for us than to stay the same. Perhaps difficulty and pain can produce virtues that other situations just couldn't. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't want pain for us, but perhaps he's able to use the circumstances of our lives for something better. But again, if God is truly our creator, we must concede that his understanding is much more robust than our own in any given situation. Now, that's not to say we believe that all suffering can be redeemed, but it is to say that there may be ways that God is working that we can't fully see or understand.
Cool. Thanks, Theo. So far in our talk tonight, we've seen how God and evil are not contradictory. And even some reasons why God might allow certain evil to occur. And as our time draws to a close, I want to make a distinction between two things: the logical problem of evil and the emotional problem of evil. I think realistically, very few people reject God just on the basis of the logical problem. Many of us just don't like the idea of God who would allow suffering to happen to ourselves or to others. And so we want nothing to do with him. Or maybe we just find it hard to trust a God who would allow pain. So maybe the more crucial question is this: what does Christianity have to say to those suffering from the emotional problem of evil? Well, when we turn to the Bible, what we find is not a God who stands aloof watching the world burn. Instead, we find a God who is distraught and constantly crying out against evil. In Exodus 3, he says, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their suffering." And most importantly, it ends with this line: "And I have come down to deliver them." You see, Christians believe that God has responded to the problem of evil. And he did that not just by sending prophets or angels. Instead, God himself entered into human suffering as the person of Jesus. Jesus was born into a Jewish family, lived under the oppressive Roman government, and all throughout his life he was lied to, cheated, rejected, scorned, and shunned. At the end of his life, he was betrayed by a close friend, accused of crimes he never committed, and even flogged with metal hooks. And just when you thought that he was stripped of all human dignity, they nailed him to a cross. The pain was so intense that they invented a word for it: excruciating. So when we ask, God, where were you in the pain? He says, I was there. I was right there suffering with you. When we say, no, God, you don't understand, he says, you know what? Actually, I do. I suffered too. Tonight, if you came here expecting to know why God allowed a specific evil in your life, unfortunately, we don't have the answers. But we do sympathize with you in the confusion. And one thing we do know, though, is that the God of the Bible knows us, loves us, and even suffers alongside us. And for us Christians, we know that the best gift we can offer to someone in the throes of pain is not a logical explanation. It's the gift of presence, being with them, being a shoulder to cry on, suffering with them. And that's exactly what God chose to do. Jesus, the Son of God, has the name Emmanuel, which means God with us. If a picture was worth 1,000 words, then how much more a life? Jesus is God's loudest proclamation that he is not distant from our pain. He has gone the full distance from the highest heights of heaven to the depths of human mystery to suffer with us, even to die on a cross.
Right, but the story doesn't just end there. It doesn't just end with Jesus hanging on the cross. Hebrews 12 says this. It says that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising its shame. So what is this joy? It's so great and so wonderful that even something as terrible as the cross could be disregarded. So I don't know about you, but recently I've been thinking a lot about my old life. I miss seeing my friends and laughing together in a crowded room. I miss going to the gym and sitting in cafes. I'm sad we didn't get to go on the road trips we had planned or to properly say goodbye to my graduating friends who went home. But this longing for my old life is complicated. I know that no matter how soon we go back to normal life, things won't really be the same. I think of the hardships being experienced right now, from the loss of life to financial instability. I wonder how today's turmoil will change how we do public gatherings or how we work or how we spend time with each other in the future. And even if things do go back to the way they were, I can't say that it would be exactly what I'm longing for either. I think this virus has shown us how quickly things can change. I think it's exposed our wishful illusion of being in control. I think it's shown us that people are frail. So I think what I'm longing for is a world where people I care about don't get sick, where kids have enough food to eat at home, where I can spend as much time as I want with the people I love without anything in the world getting in the way. So yeah, when I say I'm thinking about life as it was, the nostalgia is there, but for what really? I want to submit to all of you tonight that you and I share this complicated feeling. We are all longing for a perfect world. I think that throughout human history, we've been haunted by this desire for paradise. I think the social activism and the reforms and revolutions we've seen are hints that what we really want is some kind of heaven on earth, where there's just justice, equity, joy, and peace. Somehow, I think this always seems to elude us. If you've ever experienced reality to be a letdown, a mismatch between what you thought it would be and how it actually is, then you felt what I felt. And you see, the Bible tells us that this feeling is not an accident. There is a way things are supposed to be. There was an original design to everything, but the world and we ourselves have gotten corrupted. But the Bible also says that there will be a day where all that is wrong will be made right, and all that is broken will be made new. And that place is heaven. We are longing for heaven. Heaven is our true home where every tear will be wiped away and where death itself will be swallowed up in victory. So yeah, that joy that Jesus looked forward to when he went to the cross, it's to share heaven eternally with us. He died on the cross, paying the price for our sins, so the doors of heaven could be opened for us to come home forever. And yeah, speaking of forever, I actually wanted to talk for a little bit about time. Right, so this is the last 100 years or so. And here's the lifespan of Mr. Celino. He's a Chilean man who lived for 121 years. And actually, for a while, he held the record for the oldest living person. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, this life, it looks pretty long. But what if we compared Mr. Celino's life to the last 500 years? So if we zoom out to the last 500 years, we had some climate change, we had some science. And now, compared to 500 long years, this is Mr. Celino's life. But what about the entire human era? In the past several thousand years, we've had a few civilizations come and go. And okay, so this is what Mr. Celino's life looks like in comparison. It's tiny. Now, what if we compressed the entire human era into a tiny slice and then compared that to everything in the future? Now, this little slice on the left is everything that happened before. And as you can see, in the distant future, Earth won't be able to sustain life, and then the sun will go out. And I could go on, but the point I really want to get to is this. This timeline we just looked at, it was billions of years long, but it's tiny compared to something as big as eternity. You might be wondering, why did I bring all of this up? And it's all to say one thing. Life is short, death is certain, and eternity is long. If what the Bible says is true, then our earthly lives are nothing more than a blip in the grand scheme of things. If what the Bible says is true, then we weren't designed to die. We have souls that outlive our earthly bodies. We were designed to live forever. Even years of immense suffering is just a flash of a second, a pinprick in light of eternal bliss. So this is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a missionary who devoted her entire life to serving among the lowest rungs of society. And she said this: in light of heaven, the worst suffering on earth will be nothing more than one night in a dingy hotel. And you know the best part about all of this? As crazy as it sounds, this is not just a fairy tale or wishful thinking. We have reasons for our hope. Now, if you're wondering about that claim that I just made, we would love to talk about it. See, if you've ever wondered things like, does God exist? How can we trust the Bible? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And so on. Then I encourage you to ask. Chances are somebody invited you to this talk tonight. And I want you to bring these questions to somebody that you trust. We want a chance to share with you why our faith is not blind, but a reasonable faith. So yeah, as we're coming to an end, I just really want to thank everyone here for sticking with us. We're not experts on pandemics or theology, but even so, we hope that this talk was a little helpful for thinking about suffering in the world, especially what the Bible has to say about it.
Yeah, and that's not all. Actually, tomorrow we're going to have part 2 of 3, Transformed Pursuits, where we're going to get some more personal stories about how God transforms the things that we pursue in life. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone.
Wow, so thank you, Theo and Cynthia, for this amazing talk tonight. If what they discussed sparked something for you and you wanted to find out more resources, we have a link in the chat with like a list of books, websites, and videos that highlight some of the topics that we talked about today. So in addition, we have linked a connection form where you guys can ask us a bunch of questions and connect with us and just give us your thoughts. One thing I wanted to highlight is what we have is Course 101, and I highly recommend this. It's a course called Christian Foundations, and it covers big questions such as, does God exist? Did Jesus really resurrect from the dead? Is the Bible true? And so forth. So if you're interested in learning more about Christianity, this is definitely a good place to start. And again, you can get all of this information down in the link below. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. I'm excited to see you guys all again tomorrow for part 2 of our 3-part series, Transformed. So thank you guys for coming.